We are Forum Videos. We are previewing the 2013 NHL Playoffs, and right now we are talking to regular SBR contributor and senior sports betting columnist for AskMen.com, Dave Golokhov. We're going to start out with Minnesota and Chicago. Dave, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Minnesota and Chicago. Now this is, I'll just start out here. All right, Chicago, obviously, phenomenal team, freaking phenomenal team, but they are one of those phenomenal teams that was nevertheless a little bit overrated, despite the fact that they had, their 24-game regulation, non-losing streak or whatever it was. Overall in the year, they were actually down 5 units, and they were actually in the bottom half of the league in terms of betting. They were number 19. So normally I'd be looking to bet against them, but in this series, of course, they're playing Minnesota, and, I don't know if you bet on NHL day in, day out, but I learned my lesson during the regular season. The lesson was 10 to bet against Minnesota and 10 not to bet on them. Minnesota's actually down 10 units on the year, number 24 in the league in terms of the money standings. Now the series prices, it's interesting. It opened at Pinnacle at Chicago minus 467, Minnesota plus 398. Even at those lines, I wouldn't want to bet on Minnesota, but it's actually gotten bet down. Now we're seeing Chicago minus 359, Minnesota plus 313. What do you make of those lines, Dave?
As they say on CNBC before they talk about a stock that they've got money in, I should provide the disclaimer, but I do like the Blackhawks, and I've invested in the Blackhawks. This, to me, is the only guarantee in the 8 matchups that we have in the first round. This is as close to a guarantee as I see in the NHL. You've got the Chicago Blackhawks. Maybe they're overrated from a betting standpoint when you bet them night in, night out.
Right.
But now you have the opportunity to bet them on a series, whether just to advance or not advance. And I think that's a different story. When you compare their point total, let's just leave the betting aside. When you look at their point total on the year, the amount of points that they amassed, if you were to flesh that out over a full 82-game season, they were on pace for 132 points. Just for those people at home who are wondering, the NHL record for most points in a season is 132. So this is not just a good Chicago Blackhawks team.
Yeah.
This is a historically good team. They not only led the league in scoring, they also led the league in fewest goals allowed. So this is a really, really dominant team. There are some caveats for sure, and that's why this is sort of in the minus 400 range opposed to, the Miami Heat and the Milwaukee Bucks where it's minus 3,000. So it's still the NHL, anything can happen, but I definitely like the Blackhawks in this series.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to me, though, that, someone bet down this line at Pinnacle. It might not take a lot of money to get it from 398 to 313, but someone did it. I guess, the only answer is Backstrom. If you have a hot goalie, maybe he can win the series for you. But I look at this, I just think that, I just remember their game like to their next to last game of the regular season. They were they were ready to clinch their playoff game. Huge game, and they were at home, and they got blown out 6-1. Backstrom led up, he gave up like 3 goals in the first 10 minutes. I don't see how you can possibly make an argument for Minnesota.
Well, I think this is a little bit of a takeaway from last year. I think that's really what's happening here. When you look at last year, the Los Angeles Kings were an 8 seed that shocked the world. So I think people are wondering, maybe the Minnesota Wild, maybe the difference between 8 and 1 in the NHL isn't that big of a deal. So I think you're going to see some of that action. But when you look at the comparisons, they're simply not there.
Right.
Los Angeles Kings fired their head coach in the middle of the season or closer to the end, got in a hot streak going into the playoffs. The Minnesota Wild, in a time where they needed to play their best hockey of the season in April, they actually lost 9 of their last 14 games. You mentioned Nicholas Backstrom. He's their one sort of, you wanted to call him the one elite point where if he plays well, the team has a really good shot to win. He's actually been pulled a number of times this season, especially down the stretch, has not played well, has not looked good, did not play well against Chicago in the 3 meetings. The Blackhawks won 2 of those 3 meetings. But again, Minnesota, if the goaltending's not working, we know that they're not a high-scoring team. I think something like 8 goals in their last 5 games. It's just not a team with a lot of momentum heading into the playoffs. I'm really uncomfortable betting this team in this situation. When you look at their performance in April, when they needed wins, they didn't get them. There was the urgency there, and they didn't play like it. So I have a tough time betting this team against Chicago.
Hey, I'm in complete agreement. Chicago Blackhawks minus 359 just to win the series. I think that's a great bet, and you do too, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thanks. Great preview.